Welcome to the On Your Side podcast. I'm Gary Harper.
And I'm Susan Campbell.
Hey, we're talking about student loans.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, you're lucky. I never had one, so I was fortunate enough. You and I talked a lot about this before. I don't think you had one either, did you?
Well, we had taken out some small loans, but I was very, very lucky that my parents had paid those for me too. It was.
I thought you were going to say, no, I had an academic scholarship.
Well, I did have one of those too.
Oh, no, seriously?
Scholarship, grants, the small scholarships from little places, the local Rotary and the anywhere that I could find them. I was applying for scholarships all over the place.
Yeah, well, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
$500 or $1,000 and cobbled together an education.
Yeah, I mean, you start whittling that down, it really does make a difference. I mean, people say, it's only $500, but I mean, $500 here, $1,000 here. I mean.
Yeah. Well, and you don't want to get buried under that, you know, potentially debilitating debt. So it was a big deal to work really hard beforehand for me and my family.
Well, there are some people buried under student loan debt. Unfortunately, we're talking about 30 million borrowers out there. I mean, that is a lot of people, and they owe, I mean, anywhere from a small amount, say like $5,000, all the way up to, oh my goodness, I don't even know how much, but it's a lot, and it's a lot of water to carry. I don't know how some of these people pay it off.
Some of the monthly payments are truly,
it's like a mortgage.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, and
there has been such a long grace period with student loans because of the pandemic. When the pandemic happened, everything was kind of paused right in its tracks.
Right.
To give people a time to breathe.
Right.
And then student loan payments restarted a year ago, but we've still had this whole period of
there's a lot of
a little grace.
And there's a little or a lot of unknown out there because the White House passed this loan forgiveness thing, which really didn't last that long, and people were hopeful, and now it's going through the judicial system.
Yeah, everything's up in the air.
Everything's up in the air. But
and those balances are still on people's shoulders.
Yes. I mean, you're going to have to pay them off. And that's why we're having this podcast today, because this is really, really important for the 30 million people who have student loans, because there's a big change happening or will happen or has happened on October 1st. And for more information on that, we're talking to Jack Wallace. He's over at Yrefy here in Phoenix. You're kind of an expert in the student loan industry, Jack. Thanks for joining us on the On Your Side podcast.
Thanks for having me, and hello to your viewers.
Yeah. Listen, what is happening here? What do our listeners need to know who have a student loan? Well, even before we get into that, let's go back on a little history here. People who had student loans, the pandemic hit in 2020, and there was a pause. Walk us through kind of what happened during that pause.
Right. In March of 2020, the administrative pause on federal student loans went into effect, which meant that no payments were due and no interest was accruing when President Trump signed that order into law. And so, as was stated previously, up until September 1st of 2023, that's when the interest began to occur. There was no interest occurring for the previous 3 years. And then October 1st of 2023 was when payments were due. Now, the Department of Education put in this onramp program, which is expiring at 12/01 on October 1st, that said that you wouldn't be considered delinquent or defaulted for that 1 year period of time, so you could get your finances together and begin to make your payments. One interesting point is the total student loan portfolio outstanding is about $1.7 trillion. It bounces back and forth between whether credit cards outstanding are greater or student loans outstanding are greater. And you got 46 million Americans above and beyond, 16 million above and beyond your 30 million that you mentioned, that have both private student loans. About 10% of people that have federal student loans also have private student loans. They've gone to the high-priced Ivies or some of those other schools. So you've got some people that are looking down the barrel of making 2 monthly payments for their student loan debt. And we've seen here, I've seen in my career of 44 years, I've seen loan balances recently with a couple of $100,000. So they are like a mortgage. And you get 2 doctors or 2 lawyers that marry each other, And, you're looking at $500,000 in student loan debt.
So just to clarify for everybody, then we had the pandemic, we had a pause on everything. They didn't have to pay anything back, and they were not penalized, and interest did not grow. Then we had the onramp program, that's the onramp program where, you could pay, but if you couldn't, you really weren't penalized or anything.
You were supposed to pay.
You were supposed to pay, but if you could not or you did not, then you really didn't get the black eye.
We had a little grace. Yeah. Everything was okay. Let's figure this out, catch up. And now, no.
This is why we're doing the podcast, because now the on-ramp program is expiring. What does that mean, Jack, for student borrowers out there, knowing that this on-ramp is now gone?
Well, the on-ramp is closed as of October 1st. And so what that means is if you don't pay your federal student loan on a monthly basis, you will begin to be reported to the credit bureaus, which will negatively impact your credit if you're delinquent. And, the delinquency is one thing. The default definition with the federal government, in a mortgage, you may be defaulted at 90 days or 120. The federal government doesn't default until 270 days. But the issue is, if you want to maintain your credit or make your credit better, you've got to start in October. If you didn't start paying last October, you've got to start paying this October for your federal student loan. Now, having said that, while the courts are still litigating the SAVE program that Biden had announced, the day the Supreme Court determined that the forgiveness program 6.3 was not permissible. Has been litigated in Missouri, it's been litigated in Kansas, and now it's at the appellate court. And they've ruled that the SAVE program is on permanent hold until that's adjudicated. So if you go to www.studentaid.gov, there'll be some instances on there of income contingent repayment programs that you might be able to look at, because come this month of October, you're going back in repayment. So you're going to hear from your servicer, or you're going to hear from the Department of Education, or you're going to hear from both saying, okay, it's game time and it's time to pay your bill.
Hypothetically, let's say Susan has a $50,000 private student loan, and I have a $50,000 student loan, but it's through the feds. How does this new rule affect us?
It is mutually exclusive. The private loans are private loans with a private lender, whether it's a bank or a credit union or a not-for-profit kind of company. The federal loan, most people don't realize this, but the lender for the federal student loan program, since Obama nationalized the student loan program back during his term, is the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Treasury. So they're mutually exclusive of each other, and so you've got to deal with each one independently. If the federal loan, you've got to deal with the servicer, the Department of Education. The private loan, you've got to deal with your lender or the lender servicer if it's different from the lender.
But the private loan still is affected, though, right?
No, the private loans have been in repayment.
Okay.
And we're not subject to now, some of the lenders early on in COVID did permit people to have a pause in their payments, but they've been in repayment for the last 2.5 years. So we're really focused on the 30 to 46 million people that are either making no payments or part of the 46 million, that 16 million that are making some payments over the course of the last year. So it's just federal student loans only.
So walk us through some of the strategies to tackle this debt if people have kind of really put it on pause or haven't been consistent about making the on-time payment. Maybe, they're 15 days late this month and 4 days late the next month. And, they've just kind of been a little lackadaisical about these payments. Walk us through strategies to get back on track.
Well, the issue is you've got to make payments. So on the federal loan program, you've got to go to the website, www.studentaid.gov, and sign up for an income contingent or an income-driven repayment program that is still available. And that way you can lower your monthly payments to a percentage of your income. until they finish litigating the SAVE program. So that's the way you get your monthly payment down. Now, some people, that are in those programs have zero monthly payments. Some of them are paying $50. So it makes it, it's a percent. I think it's from 5 to 10% of whatever your income is that you can be making payments for. So it's a de minimis amount compared to being in a standard repayment that is 10 years and paying a couple $100 or a couple of $1,000 a month, depending upon, what your payment is.
How often can that change? Like if I enter my information about my income 6 months ago, and now I got a new job with a way bigger paycheck, do I have to immediately go and enter that new information, or how often do I have to update that?
There's usually an annual review. Now, the good due diligent citizen would go in and make the changes, but once a year, you're going to have to update your data at a minimum, and it could go up or could go down. Your income could go up, your income could go down. So it works both ways.
Have you seen people get themselves into trouble during this pause in student loans? And I'll give you an example.
The answer is yes. When they were getting their payments from the federal government, the stimulus payments, everybody was rich. They weren't making their student loan payments. They were getting money from the federal government. And actually, people were saving money because of the money they were getting from the federal government. The savings rate during COVID was, much higher than it was normally. Now the savings rate is down to like 3.4%. I think the most recent numbers, that I saw. And the credit card debt is now bouncing back and forth with the student loan debt over $1 trillion. And because of inflation, maybe because of the high interest rates we've had over the course of the last 2 years, people have been living off their credit cards. And between 30 to 50% of people are living off their credit card and not paying down their balance on a monthly basis.
When that pause took effect, let's just say somebody had a $500 a month student loan and now they don't have to pay that. Did you see a lot of people say, hey, you know what? I can use that $500 to apply to a new car. So let's go get a new car, some new wheels.
The answer is yes. And if you look at, twice a year, I go to consumer credit conferences and we get the update on what we call the other asset classes away from student loans. So a car loan, credit cards, personal consumer loans. And the answer is yes. The delinquency and default rates in those categories have been high over the course of the last 6 months and higher than normal. And that's without a lot of people not making federal student loan payments. So I'm very concerned that you're going to see an increase in delinquencies and defaults, whether it be mortgages, auto loans, credit card loans, or consumer loans, as we get beyond and into this month of October of 2024.
Walk me through how fast you think we're actually going to see that. Is that going to be maybe an immediate impact that we see, or is that something that we're looking out months and months from?
It's a combination of both because, as I said earlier, the definition of delinquency and default in the private sector, usually, depending upon what the fine print says in a promissory note for your car or whatever, they may define delinquency as 15 days after a payment is due or 30 days. But once you get to that 31 days, that's usually the traditional delinquency definition. And default can be anywhere from 90 to 120 days for traditional lending. So that's the definition there. The federal government makes their own rules and regulations, and they consider delinquency, technically to be at 90 days and default at 270 days. But you're not going to get that kind of leniency from the other asset classes. But since last February, and I'll be in a meeting next month with the same group, they saw a big jump in delinquencies and defaults as people began to go back into repayment in October of 2023, because they went out and did exactly what you said. They bought a car, or they spent more money on their credit card, or they bought a house. And none of this stuff was being reported with regard to your federal student loan on your credit report. So now that's going to change come October 1st.
When borrowers come to you for help, what is the average student loan that you see for, say, a 4-year degree, a bachelor degree? What are people?
Undergraduate degree, they go anywhere between $30,000 and $90,000, depending upon whether they went to a public 4-year private school or whether they went to a private, like one of the Ivies or a high-priced next tier school down from the Ivies, because those tuitions now are the Ivy schools are up around $92,000 a year.
What's the average monthly payback that you're seeing for these students?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're in the standard repayment program, which is 10 years, it's substantially above $200 a month, which seems to be the crossover point of where people can afford a $200 cell phone bill or whatever. But if you get above $200, $400, $500, $750 or a couple of, we see people coming in here that have undergraduate or graduate loans, or people that decided they couldn't decide what they wanted to do. So they got an undergraduate loan in political science, one in philosophy, one in anthropology. I had one the other day. The guy had 3 undergraduate degrees. I said, why don't you go get a graduate degree so you can get a job? And he's lugging around a couple $100,000 and he's making 50 grand. And I was like, this is not going to end well.
He's going in circles.
Yeah.
Right. As you said, it's not sustainable.
Hey, Jack, I think I kind of identified a problem a couple of years ago talking to some young people, and correct me if I'm wrong. These student loans are pretty fast and loose, and they're not really looked at closely. And by that, I mean a lot of these students are using their student loans to pay rent, to buy groceries, for everyday expenses. And they're not using it for what it's intended for, tuition or books or whatever. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I'll bring up, I'm old enough to where, when I was going to college in the early 70s, the check used to be made out to the student. And then, the Wall Street Journal would run an article every year about the kids out in Aspen, Colorado that took their $15,000 and went skiing and never showed up at school. Now, the school gets cut the check and then the kid or the parent gets what's left over. But part of the determination of what is permissible expenses is room and board, books, but also, if you're commuting to school, you can include that. If you're living away from home, you can include your airfare to fly home for the holidays. And housing is permissible. So if you're not living on campus, and so many kids these days, because of the lack of housing on campus, are living on campus the first year or the second year, but after that, they're living, off campus. And so that rent payment is what's being used instead of the dorm payment that's going to the school. So those are permissible expenses.
Wow.
Walk us through the consequence. What is the actual consequence of a delinquency or a default on a student loan payment?
Well, it varies whether you got a federal loan or whether you have a private loan. And one of the things that you got to watch out on the federal loan side is if you go into delinquency and then default, and you don't cure that default, they have, besides the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Treasury, you're going to have the IRS knocking on your door because they can garnish your wages and do, whether you have a job or whether you're, collecting Social Security. So that kind of stuff happens automatically as part of the collections process of the federal student loan program. On the private loan program, it's a whole different ballgame and a whole different process.
So that
the federal side, it's that.
But that's an example of something that was all on pause and coming back.
Correct. Yeah, there's been no collection effort at all. And there was no accrual of interest. Look, we've got people that graduated between the class of 2020 and the class of 2023. And even the class of 2024 wouldn't be due to make their first loan payment until November or December. So you've got 4 classes of kids that have never made a student loan payment.
Wow. Well, they better get used to it because the hammer's coming down. Hey, Jack,
Correct.
Thanks so much for being on the On Your Side podcast. Real quickly, if borrowers out there maybe need some more information or maybe they need help getting their loan down, where can they find Yrefy, or if they want to find out more about you?
If it's a private loan, go to yrefy.com. If it's a federal loan, go to the www.studentaid.gov to get yourself, and do it immediately as soon as they see your guys' segment.
Yep. Well, hopefully they'll do that. Hey, listen, we really appreciate you being on the On Your Side podcast, Jack. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me.
The On Your Side podcast is produced by Brad Denny. Our audio engineer and editor is Todd Martin. Segment producer is Colin Stanton. And I'm Gary Harper.
And I'm Susan Campbell. If you have a problem you can't resolve, maybe we can. Send us a message through azfamily.com or our AZ Family mobile app. Look for the On Your Side section and leave us a message. Thanks so much for listening to the On Your Side podcast. And if you like it, leave us a review. We'll see you next week.
On Your Side is on Good Morning Arizona every weekday morning at 6:45 and 7 o'clock. And every weekday evening on Good Evening Arizona at 4 and 5 o'clock. You can also catch it on Arizona's Family News at 9 on 3TV every weeknight.